Okay, we're recording. And let me get participants view up so I can see when our other folks join us. But Chance and then Terza, if you would not mind, could you give us just a brief intro, spiel, bio of who you are, what you're doing with the CLAS Scholars Program, or in research generally at the moment?
Sure thing. Yeah. So, hi everybody. My name is Chance. I am a fourth year senior here at the University of Florida. I'm currently in the geology department getting my Bachelor's of Science degree, and I'll be graduating this summer. Right now with the CLAS or the CLAS program and kind of just research in general, I am working with Dr. Amy Williams in the department, who some of you might have seen around with the Perseverance landing, as she is one of the chief science chairs for that rover mission that just touched down on Mars a couple days ago. And so my research with CLAS involves looking at certain sample analogs on Earth and performing experiments similar to the Curiosity rover, and then publishing those results in a select number of papers, poster presentations, conferences, the likes. With COVID, a lot of it has been remotely, but I have gone to some in-person conferences as well. And yeah, that's pretty much the general summary of how I do things here.
Awesome. Terza?
Hey guys, I'm Terza. I'm an economics major here at the University of Florida. I'll be graduating in May of this year. Currently, I work with Dr. Roger Blair in the economics department. We do a lot of work on antitrust economics, which is part of industrial organization. Essentially, we're looking at the structure of firms to see if they are participating in anti-competitive behavior. So think kind of monopoly stuff. Right now, we have a bunch of research projects, but we're also looking at Apple and big tech industries right now who have come up in the news for potentially anti-competitive behavior.
Awesome. I noticed Olivia has also joined us. Olivia, if you wouldn't mind, could you also give a quick intro just to who you are and kind of what you're working on in research?
Yeah, so my name's Olivia. I am a dual degree anthropology and geology major, and right now I have a CLAS scholarship that is the argon dating of the archaeology site that I'm working on. So it's argon dating of like Muchana Burago rock shelter in southwest Ethiopia. So I'm looking at ways to like look at the human occupation of the site and figure out like how old that human occupation is through like ash and like dating the ash of the site.
Awesome. 3 really cool projects. Is anybody else? It's hard for me to look at all the names at once. Has anybody else joined us who's a guest? If so, speak up because I don't see your name on the list. Okay, I think it's going to be mainly you guys, and then hopefully the other folks will show up for session 2. Okay, so you can raise your blue hand if you have a question. I think that would be the easiest way to keep things organized. Hopefully you guys thought a little bit about your questions for today. Franco. Franco. You might be having audio issues. You were unmuted a second ago, and now you're muted, but I can't hear anything. Franco, is your volume down possibly? So 1 second, please. Okay. We'll come back to your question. Julie, I think, had a hand next.
Hi, does my microphone work? It didn't last time.
It works this time.
Okay. So I'm basically just wondering in general for you guys, is your research topic something that you were like pretty interested in and knew a decent amount about and kind of were asking about or seeking out someone who was near that same interest, or did you kind of form your connection with whoever you work with and they kind of introduced you and helped you learn a lot more about your specific topic. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so this is for all three, I think. What order do we want to go in? Let's go reverse alphabetical by first name. So Tirza, and then Olivia, and then Chance.
So when I started working with Dr. Blair, I really had no idea what antitrust economics was. I learned most of my stuff from working with him. I actually started out just helping him out around the office, and then through all the questions I asked him, he was like, hey, you could probably do research with me. But the thing is, through his mentorship of me, I was able to choose my projects within antitrust economics. So although he taught me a lot about it, I still had some say in the projects that I did.
Real quick, because I'm interested in this, and other people might be too. You said working with him around the office. In what capacity were you working with your mentor before you started into research?
So Dr. Blair, he has macular degeneration, so he can't read. So he generally needs a student assistant to help him out with emails and just writing manuscripts and things like that. So that was when, as a freshman, I first started out helping him with these sorts of things. And then from there, the partnership or mentorship spiraled into me being able to do research with him.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Olivia?
So I actually first started like researching in Ethiopia when I did the U of in Ethiopia study abroad program that's run with Dr. Stephen Brandt, who's a anthropology professor. And I actually returned for a second year, just like last year. And I applied for CLAS, like the scholarship program, because I wanted to like contribute to research at the site. And I ended up doing that with like both Dr. Brandt, and I actually also reached out to a geology professor like Dr. Courtney Sprain, who is like kind of starting an argon dating lab at like in the geology department. So that's kind of how I ended up jumping from anthropology to geology a bit, because I also reached out to her. So it was kind of like a process. Yeah.
So just to clarify, so it started with a study abroad experience, and that's what led to the research experience?
Yeah, so it's a study abroad, but it's also like a field program for archaeology students. So it counts towards like the anthropology major, but you spend 6 weeks researching and excavating at an archaeological site.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and Chance?
So going into my research, I had a baseline understanding of geology as I had been in the major for 1 year prior, but I had no prior relationship with Dr. Williams. Essentially, the way the geology department does a lot of their research is that the professors and the faculty who are looking to take on undergraduates will put out a call, be like, hey, I'm looking for, X number of undergraduate researchers. If you would like to work in my laboratory, reach out and we can talk, have an interview and figure it out. So on a whim, Dr. Williams was new to the department and her research seemed extremely fascinating, working on Mars. So I reached out to her, sat down for an interview, talked to her about it. More specifically, I knew absolutely nothing about her specific field going into it, which is astrobiology and planetary geology, not a thing. But I was honest with it. I'm like, don't really know much about it. I'm fascinated to learn, and I really want to kind of put a lot of effort into it. She welcomed me into the lab group and has been mentoring me for the last 3 years on it. And at this point now, I'm say I'm decently competent. Yeah, I'm applying for graduate degrees in astrobiology, so I think it's safe to say that it rubbed off a bit. But it was more or less kind of something that I'd always thought was an interesting field. Wasn't entirely sure I was qualified for it, but figured I'd take the chance, for lack of a better word, and go for it.
Very cool. Allison?
Hi guys, thank you for taking the time to be here. So my question is, were there any limitations and or obstacles that you guys faced while you were doing your research? And if so, what did you do and how did you approach those limitations?
We can just go in the same order for convenience, if you guys don't mind.
I guess maybe one of the biggest obstacles that we've seen this past year is just COVID. So fortunately for my research, that wasn't a big issue. Since economics research, generally you don't even have a lab. You can kind of do a lot of this stuff over the internet or just with a computer. But definitely I have seen, like, we weren't able to go to a couple conferences this year because of COVID. And it's also been a bit more difficult to interact with my research mentor and also have access to various supplies and books and research materials that are in the office. So that has definitely been a challenge, but not as much of a challenge for other people who have actual labs that they have to go to.
Right. Olivia, what about in your field?
Yeah, so I actually had a different project when I first got the scholarship, and I was interested in like a different form of dating, but it would have involved me going to a different university to learn the procedures and then also returning to Ethiopia to collect the samples. And I was actually in Ethiopia like last March when like kind of everything shut down. So I didn't really have a chance to collect like all of the samples and export them for what I needed. So I kind of had to restructure my project based on what like I could have and like what samples I had in the US already. But it ended up working out for the better because I have a stronger project now. So kind of worked out in that way.
That's cool. Yeah, I've heard that from a few people that face similar challenges. Chance, what about you as far as obstacles?
Well, the primary obstacle for me with my research was a bit of a mental one, honestly, in terms of getting the hang of the equipment I use. Because a lot of the sample material or the equipment I run my samples on are not only a little bit on the complicated side, but they're also rather expensive. So it's always a bit nerve-wracking to run something on the chromatograph or whatnot, because if something goes terribly wrong, it's technically, worth more than probably my entire tuition to fix if I break it. So it was more of just a very, very slow process of constantly asking, a million questions to Dr. Williams, always asking, can you walk me through this again? Can you show me how to do this again? And I think the biggest hurdle was understanding like, it's okay to not be fully equipped and understand, and simply just to ask more questions, and then to, not really be embarrassed by it. Because I was embarrassed at first, not really knowing a lot of stuff, because we had some graduate students in the lab who were working on their own projects, who were very comfortable with the equipment, but I was still kind of new to everything. And I think the hardest thing, but once I got over it, was a very good experience, was simply understanding that it's okay not to know everything going into research, because it can be very intimidating, and just to ask a lot of questions.
That is great advice. Real quick, Franco, did you get your audio working?
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's working now. You want to ask your question?
Perfect. Yeah, sorry about earlier. Thank you all for being here and taking the time. I had a question regarding finding or being more acclimated to the specific research you're in after starting out. Chance just mentioned his learning curve that he had with the machinery and just getting well versed, and as well as you all have. But my question was, when you first started in research, that was your point of knowing the least about that specific field. But as you progressed in the field through research, what would you say was the best use of resources that you took to kind of make yourself more well equipped to be in that field? And what would you recommend? So yeah, thank you.
Are we going in the same order again?
Yeah, I figure why not? Then we can just kind of move right along.
So in economics, there's not a lot of huge machinery you have to use. You just need to use a computer, I guess. I think what really helped me the most was just asking my mentor questions of random things that would just pop up. And then through discussions that really helped out. I know that's not for a lot of professors, maybe they don't have a lot of time to talk with undergrads, but so I had a unique position to some extent. But another thing that really helped me out was just reading some academic papers as well, to kind of see what was going on in the field and how that could relate to my research.
Very good. That's what last week we were working on, reading academic papers, which is kind of a challenge in itself. But it's good to know that that can be useful. Olivia?
Yeah, so for me, it was a little different because I kind of went into this project already having like about a year of experience working at that site. What was like kind of difficult for me was kind of like jumping into geology because I only had like about a year of coursework that I had taken. So it was kind of a bit of a learning curve having to do like geology research at the archaeology site. Kind of like chance, a lot of the stuff for me was learning all of the machines. And I would say the most helpful thing for me was writing everything down so that I could always go back, make sure like, oh, like what steps did I do? And kind of like being able to recreate that later on was like massively helpful, especially when it comes to like writing down the procedures for a project. Like just having that information there makes it a lot faster.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely piggybacking on what Olivia just said. Taking careful notes and procedural ones, especially if you are in a STEM research field, is invaluable. It saves you so much time and a lot of worry just to be comfortable with what you have, as if you have, a step-by-step process of what to do. But you can also read a lot of the material surrounding your field of study. It's extremely helpful because sometimes if something is unique or not quite going the way you are expecting it to go, if you are well versed enough in your subject area, you are able still to infer what's going on. Or if there's an issue with your research, whether it be machine related or data collecting or something related just specifically to your like general prompt that you're working with, if you know the material very well just inherently, it's easier for you to kind of solve through what might be causing a problem or to look for a solution. I guess the final thing is like if you are fortunate enough to have multiple people working with a professor, because like Teresa was saying, professors don't have a lot of time. Sometimes they're very, packed schedules. Feel free to work with your peers. If someone is a little more experienced than you and they are doing some kind of research, maybe ask if you can shadow them for a day or two to kind of see how they undergo their research and use it to help you structure and guide your own.
It's really good advice too. It definitely helps to have a bigger network in research and more points of collaboration. At this stage, Tashnia, I think your hand was up next.
Hi, my question is for Olivia. You mentioned going to Ethiopia. Did you learn anything there with like collecting data and being so hands-on that you could not have like experienced elsewhere?
There definitely like was a huge like kind of learning jump from going there because a lot of the project, like the study abroad, is geared towards learning how to excavate and like do archaeological field work. So like in that sense, I learned a lot of that. There's also a lot of like technical things like keeping like a like field journal and stuff like that that you also learn like part of the field, which kind of helps later on when you're doing like research in the lab.
Very cool. Morgan, I think, was next.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for talking to us today. My question is like some you guys kind of discussed like lacking experience a little bit. When you lack that experience, how do you make yourself stand out in regards to other applicants in securing a research position?
I think interest in the topic. So I guess my experience was a little bit different, but I know a lot of friends and other people who have done research, and really a key is if you have a professor that you want to work with, often, okay, well, if you're in a class with that professor, it's a matter of going to office hours, showing that you're really interested in it. I also had another friend who, I think through some of these programs, part of an assignment, she had to go interview a professor. So she went and interviewed a professor just for a class, maybe it was first year Florida or something else. And she was just so excited about the research this guy was doing that he pretty much offered her a research position like on the spot. So I would definitely say, like, if you want a research position, look at the professor's research and just ask pertinent questions and just show how interested you are.
Yeah, I kind of definitely agree with what she said. For me, the research professor I ended up like applying like for the scholarship with was the professor that I've like worked with for like a year prior to that. In terms of like me having a geology professor also kind of like support me in my geology research, I think it also definitely had to do with like my willingness to learn like all of the steps and all of the procedures, but also the professor kind of like seeing that potential and like is also willing to work with me. So I think that's a huge factor in that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Passion and enjoyment of the subject is a very useful thing to go into any of these interviews with. Professors, if they would want to take on new researchers, whether undergrad or graduate, they want to see that, you know, you might not be the most well versed on the topic material, but they want to see that you are passionate about conducting the research in general. It's easier for them to train someone up who is passionate and wants to learn than to simply update someone who is more knowledgeable but not really fully invested. So I think doing a little bit of research into what the professor you want to work with does. If they've published papers, maybe read some of their papers and see kind of what most of their past projects have been. If you're in a class with them, all the better. You know, kind of foster that one-on-one relationship, but don't be afraid, even if you're pretty much just cold calling somebody, to show up and be honest with your level of expertise. You know, don't make yourself seem dumb, but don't, you know, overinflate your abilities. If you are lacking in a certain area, simply express it, but be like, I am willing to put in all the time and effort required to master that remaining expertise because I really am interested in what you're doing with X, Y, and Z. And I feel like that's probably the most impactful thing is go into your interviews or your requests or anything you're doing with these people with some knowledge on them prior, because that shows that not only do you like the idea of working with them, but you like it so much that you've taken the initiative to research them prior.
Yeah, all three answers very very good and definitely echoing what our faculty guests that we've had in this class in the past have said as well. So that's a pretty universal truth that enthusiasm goes a long way. And if you find yourself really struggling to muster that enthusiasm for your subject, you know, research can be an existential kind of thing too. It can give you a moment to reflect on like, is this really the right path for me kind of thing, and make some changes sometimes. I believe Anita had a hand next.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us. My question was for all three of you, and I like that you guys have different backgrounds and whatnot, because I think each of you will be able to provide like a different answer. My question was there ever a moment, and I'm sure there was maybe more than one, but that you felt unqualified to do, you know, whatever role you were doing at that time? And basically, how did you overcome that? Because I'm sure it happens a lot, and I think for many of us, like as students who are just, you know, kind of exploring the possibility of going into research, those fears like already exist, and we don't even have like a research position yet. So I would love to hear how you overcame that.
So just to be clear, you're asking us how we kind of overcame a challenge when we felt unqualified, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So this definitely happened more at the beginning of my time researching with my mentor. I guess maybe in the initial stages when I was first starting on my USP project about a year ago, there were a lot of cases where I would be going through this research and I would be reading an academic research paper, for example, relevant, and I just wouldn't really get reading some sort of antitrust case. So at that point, I would just make a list of questions and go and ask my research professor, and he was kind enough to be able to just talk over those things with me. So he was encouraging, and through that, I learned a lot through the process because I was able to learn from him. So yeah, I think also kind of what Chance was saying earlier, and if you can't talk with your professor, there's also a lot of other like grad students, peers around you who you can probably also discuss various questions with.
I think for me, the most helpful thing was just kind of being open to correction. A lot of it has to do with like asking questions and kind of being engaged when they're trying to teach you or show you how to use an instrument, but also just like knowing and like coming to the understanding that you may not always be doing something correctly. kind of just like helps you in the long run in terms of like how you like operate and do research. So like knowing that you're not always right is like definitely an important component and kind of helps you become a better researcher for that.
Yeah, definitely going off what Olivia said. My first time running samples on my own with Dr. Williams, I completely messed everything up. I did the wrong chemical reagent. I put the samples in for the wrong program. The instrument had a pressure gauge malfunction that I didn't know how to solve. It was, for lack of better words, a complete disaster. And so afterwards, you know, I definitely felt a bit out of my depth. I was thinking like, you know, gosh, like, I don't really know if I can do this or if I'm qualified for any of these kind of runs or whatnot. And the main thing I did to help was, aside from, you know, talking with a good support group is always nice to have, you know, just in general for being at college with friends and family. But I literally just sat down with my professor and I explained my concerns to her. I simply said, you know, I still want to do this, but I'm not really sure if I can. And for me, and just being honest with her was one of the most important things I could have done at that time, because you know she was able to sit down and go through and do a different approach to teaching me how everything runs. You know, because I simply wasn't really properly following along, wasn't clicking with me the first way she explained it. And so, for being honest and being like I was saying, you know, I simply don't know, or I'm not qualified for this, or I simply don't understand. Being honest about not understanding is going to help you so much because it is going to then allow you to improve. And you never have to be embarrassed to say you don't understand, because the only thing that can happen afterwards is you simply get better at it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thanks. And I think Sabrina is next on my screen with a question.
Hello everyone, nice to meet you. My question was like pretty much connected to like how you guys were able to like cope with like feeling unqualified. Was there ever a chance like you guys you found research but you like reached out through email, but was there ever a time like they didn't ever reach out? And if that did happen, did you guys think about like emailing them again or just finding a different research to go with? Because I'm kind of struggling with that because I'm looking for research, but not many professors are like, you know, reaching out. So it's like, when is a good time to like email them again, or was there like a limit for them?
So just to clarify, it sounds like a couple of questions. When is a good time to get responses from professors? Did you ever email potential mentors or research collaborators more than once? And were you ever in a situation where you reached out and got silence, is what I'm hearing. Is that right, Sabrina?
Yes, sir. So the first question would be fine. Don't want to overwhelm.
Well, no, let's do all three.
Okay.
So I don't have a lot of experience with your specific situation. I think most professors at UF, they're supposed to help students, so they should reply. I would say maybe if they don't respond to you, you can respond again in a week and say like, hey, did you see my previous email? That can almost be a way of those professors kind of, what's the word? So it's like they can test your level of interest in the position kind of thing if you respond again. So if you respond, you're pretty much saying, oh, I'm really interested in this. Do you have various opportunities? Obviously, I would say the best thing to do is go in person, but that's not really an option right now. So once kind of COVID settles down, things go back to normal. I think the best way to really interact with professors is in person, because then they kind of have to talk to you. Was that all the questions or did I miss one? Sorry.
I think that about covers it. But Olivia, did you want to?
Yeah, so I think a lot of undergrad researchers have that problem where they're reaching out to professors and a lot of times they don't reply. It's, in my experience, it's not really like them personally not wanting to work with you so much as like they get so many emails and a lot of them are so busy that they just kind of forget to reply. So for me, like depending on what time frame I'm working in, I usually like wait a week or two, then just follow up. Even like when I was looking at like graduate schools and stuff like that, a lot of times I would have a very long one-sided conversation until people eventually got back to me. but it's definitely not something to take personally. It's just kind of working with what you got, especially with COVID.
Yeah, definitely I can relate with the graduate schools trying not to take it personally. I can't say how many times I've applied to work with somebody and simply never gotten a reply. So in terms of undergraduate research, in terms of like figuring out when you might want to move on to a different opportunity, it really depends on how much you want to work with a certain professor. If it's simply the fact that they're not responding to you, like Olivia was saying, more likely than not, they simply either didn't see your email because it got buried, or they simply had so many things going on, they forgot to reply to it. I know my professor that I work with currently, sometimes I'll email her and she just won't see it. So don't be afraid to email them repeatedly. I think that after your initial email, about a week is a good amount of time to wait before sending a follow-up. And then if you're still not getting a reply, maybe like every 3 or 4 days or so, just send a follow-up. Because if they're not responding no, then odds are they simply just haven't seen. Most faculty are going to give you the decency if they don't want to work with you of simply telling you, I don't want to work with you, sorry. It might be, a little hurtful if they say that, but they're not going to simply ghost you, for lack of a better word. So just constantly stay on them. But if it's more of kind of like a passing thing where you're like, oh, this person would be cool to work with, you can send out one email or maybe two. But if they're not responding to you and you're not really dead set on that specific faculty, don't be afraid to branch out to different people to work with. It really just depends on how much you want to work with certain people, depends on how long you should wait. It's kind of a case by case basis, but just like everyone's saying, don't be afraid to talk to them. Silence is not a no. And so until you get one, you can keep asking.
Okay, I want to go ahead and take Natalia's question, since Natalia, you had your hand up for a bit. It is technically 11:30, so if any of y'all absolutely have to be somewhere, I won't hold you up leaving the Zoom session, but if you can stay for just a few more minutes, I'd like to hear one more question for our guests from Natalia.
Hi, I just wanted to really ask, like, how early, like, did you feel prepared to start reaching out to these professors, and what, like, amount of experience or level of coursework did you feel you needed to be, like, qualified to, like work in that area of research?
It probably depends on the lab. For me, I didn't really have a lot of economics under my belt when I applied and was able to start working with Dr. Blair. When I really started doing my own research was after 2 years of coursework, but I probably could have started off a little bit earlier as well. I think what happens in a lot of research situations is that what you're doing in the lab, you may not even learn in some of your classes because it's so specific. Also, I know that for certain grant proposals, they can go for up to 3 years or so, and often professors may actually want a student for 3 years. So you could even start looking as a freshman now, or even when you get started. A big thing, of course, is contacts. One of my friends just started doing research immediately when she started at UF, but she knew someone at that point. So it's really dependent on the sort of research you want to do, the professor who you'd want to work with, and I guess your interest as well. I think often how some people find research positions is through the classes they're in. So they meet a professor who's teaching their class and they interact with that professor, and the professor's like, oh wow, this person's a good student, I think they can also be a part of my lab. So very dependent on the situation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. In terms of like my anthropology research, I definitely had like a fair amount of experience having that study abroad before I actually did the like scholarship a year later. In terms of like the geology work that I do, I think I had like a semester maybe of like actual coursework besides like a spring or a summer semester. Yeah, a lot of the work I do now though is actually like doesn't relate to my coursework too much. You definitely learn a lot like once you start, and like once like your professor kind of shows you what you're supposed to be doing, what you're supposed to be looking for. I definitely think an aspect that helps is reading a lot of research papers, because it kind of gives you a better understanding of what you should be looking for.
Yeah, definitely agreeing with what Teresa and Olivia just said. Your research will likely be much more specific than your classes go into depth. When I started my research, I had about a semester and a half of core geology under my belt, which was useful to have, but was not at all required. For example, we have a new undergraduate researcher joining our lab group who is a freshman. So this is her second semester at UF, and she is tagging on to the group. Knows almost nothing about geology as she has just started the major, but she is essentially starting from the ground up and is going to be hopefully working on a project for most of her duration here at UF as an undergrad. So there isn't really a minimum amount of expertise you can have depending on your professor. It's unsatisfying to say case by case, but never be intimidated to reach out and say, I have this much expertise is, I'd just like to work with you. Oftentimes, like they were saying earlier, professors are okay with, mentoring you up for multiple years. They want you to be a recurring member of their lab group and therefore willing to put the time in to train you. And a lot of the core coursework that you do is necessarily applicable. I look at, samples and lipid composition that I do in my lab. None of my geology courses cover anything about lipid preservations and acid mine drainage sites or anything of that sort. So that's literally an entire skill set and knowledge that I have acquired from my time in the lab that I didn't have and didn't need going into it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much, Terza, Olivia, and Chance, for joining us today. This was extremely helpful, extremely cool. I will pause the recording now. Let's start with Karina and then Chance and then Jonathan.
So my research is basically about the wellness movement and its public health implications for today. Specifically, I'm studying the rise of what I'm calling wellness consumerism and its linkages to health misinformation. And so far, I'm basically finding evidence to say that the wellness economy and basically all the advertising and products and services that go into it are causing there to be more online health misinformation. And there's some kind of correlation between that.
Very interesting.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chance. I am a senior here at the University of Florida. I'm a geology major on my Bachelor's of Science track. I currently do research with Dr. Amy Williams, who some of you may have heard, as she is one of the chief science chairs of the Perseverance rover mission. My research involves looking at acid mine drainage sites here on Earth and using them as analogs for possible Martian soils and searching for life preserved within these rocks using the same instruments and techniques that the Curiosity rover on Mars uses.
Hey everybody, I'm Jonathan. I work with Dr. James Hamlin in the physics department, and we synthesize and characterize novel materials under extreme conditions. So we're interested from everything from superconductors, which allow electricity to pass perfectly through them, to topological insulators, which are insulating on the outside but conducting on the inside. All sorts of interesting stuff.
Thanks so much, everybody. And Chance, it just occurred to me as you were talking again, I actually saw your mentor on the on my news feed this morning while I was browsing the news. There's an article, Amy Williams is a UF geology professor during the day, NASA scientist by night, was the title of the article. So I might share that with the class later. Pretty cool stuff. But thanks, Karina, Chance, and Jonathan. So yeah, go ahead, guys. If you have a question, raise your blue hand and you can unmute. And I think I saw Nikita's hand go up first.
Yeah, I had a question for Karina. I was just wondering what the oral history program was and how you got involved with it.
Definitely. So the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, from what I know, is basically a program where Dr. Ortiz, who my mentor is, basically has, and he has interns help him too, but they go out and they carry out interviews with people who can be considered historical figures. And he uses that to get an account of things that happened and of movements. And overall, like a lot of people's history isn't written down because their history wasn't considered important. So he specifically is trying to get the history that has remained through their life experiences and through anecdotes and things like that. As far as my experience and how I got involved with him, he actually started off as like my multicultural mentor. I was in this like freshman mentorship program. So I got to know him. He recommended doing the CLAS Scholars program. We talked about what I could possibly do research with. And so that is the oral component of my research, is kind of interviews that I'm doing with people who have witnessed the rise of the wellness movement and who can tell me about like whether they've seen more health misinformation online and that sort of thing. But yes, it's an awesome program. I really recommend getting involved.
I'll go ahead and put the link to their program page in the chat for anybody who wants to bookmark it if you're also interested in learning more about our oral history program in class. It is very cool. Kara?
My question was also for Karina. I was curious what inspired you specifically to focus on the misinformation within like the health industry and with wellness. And I was also curious if you read or looked into any of the anything that was written or done by Linda Bacon or Christy Harrison.
Hi. So no, those two bells aren't ringing a name, but if you like put them in the chat, like look it up later and I'll like see what that's about. As far as what inspired me, I'm gonna be totally honest. I was having my college experience and I was trying to figure out how to feed myself, and I was looking at all these articles online and I was finding that they all had different things to say about what I should do and what kind of lifestyle I should have. And I was like, okay, like I'm getting contradicting information here. Like, why aren't people talking about this? Like, here's an article, it's a blog that's giving me health recommendations. And, you know, why am I going onto this blog and I'm not going on to like, obviously the CDC wouldn't be a relevant party here, but I'm not going on to like passtheplate.gov or something like that, you know? So that really started to get me thinking about it. And then as I did more research, I realized it's like a very prevalent thing. And we are constantly encountering it in all kinds of different mediums, TikTok, Instagram, it doesn't really matter where. And it's because, and so to kind of wrap that into the wellness movement, I have been very interested in the wellness movement for a long time, and just like its kind of overall health promotion and things like that. So like one of the things I did for this research was I read a whole book about the wellness movement. And so one thing that I found really interesting about this research was that what's been happening now with like the wellness economy and things like that is completely different than how it started. Like the wellness movement actually started off with Congress publishing like this amazing study and kind of working to make new policy that was supposed to protect people's health. And so everything that was going on was being reaffirmed by these health organizations and by the government. And now it's like, you know, it's more of a marketing thing. But yes, if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Very cool. I see a hand up from Vivek.
Yes. This one's for like all three of y'all. So how did you guys get in touch with your mentor and like ask them for research? Like what was y'all's process?
I guess I'll take that first. So basically I had to write a research proposal, and I wrote a lot of different things before I wrote something that really made sense and that then I decided to submit like for the program. But the process that I had with him just basically was a lot of discussion and then trying to write down my ideas.
Yeah, so for me, I guess the person I'm currently working with, James Hamlin, is actually my second mentor. I started working with Amlan Biswas, and then he's kind of recommended me to work with James Hamlin. But I started working with Dr. Biswas. I literally just sent him an email. He said on his website that he was looking for undergraduate students. I was like, what he's doing sounds pretty cool. And then an email and a quick meeting later, I started working in his lab.
Yeah, so for me, the geology department, essentially each year the professors put out a call for undergraduate researchers, and you're able to contact them directly and ask for interviews or to be part of their lab groups. So I reached out to Dr. Williams on a whim because she was new to the department at the time and was our only kind of planetary geoscientist, which I really wanted to just kind of look more into. Emailed her, got a response back, sat down with her for a series of interviews, after which she invited me to join the lab group, and I've been there for about 3 years now. So.
Thanks. And I think Selma had a hand up next.
Yes, my question is also for Chance. So your research is really interesting. And like, the analogs for Martian soils, it seems very like speculative of something else other than just like pure lab work. So my question is just like, what kind of work do you do in your lab? And like, did you know that this work was going to be a little bit different from like, I guess bench work or like field work? And like, what made you kind of be drawn to that?
Good question. So most of my day-to-day processes with this research involve prepping samples, running them on the instruments in the laboratory. Time is spent inferring the results and processing the data, and then taking these and forming them either into paper presentations, poster presentations, conference talks, all of these kind of information. It's like you said, it's a lot of inferencing and kind of comparative analysis, not simply just sticking something in a machine and watching the pretty lights turn on and off, which is what I thought it would be for a little bit. But in terms of like getting into this kind of experience, this was my first ever kind of dipping my toe in the pond of research at all. So I didn't really have any expectation necessarily about what I'd be doing like in the slightest. And specifically with this research, I wasn't an expert of any kind on astrobiology before this. I was a sophomore geology major, so I had taken like a semester and a half of core geology. So it was kind of like more or less running before you learn to walk, essentially, is how I took my research approach to it. But I was able to get a lot of support along the way from my mentor, so worked out.
Awesome. Marianne?
Hi, so this is a general question for all you guys. It was basically how much research before going into the actual research did you do, like related to reading articles and stuff like that, and how in depth did you get before going in?
So we can do Karina and then Jonathan and then Chance again.
So as soon as I kind of had an idea of what I wanted to talk about, I did a lot of preliminary Google searches just to see if there was anything close to what I wanted to say, or if anything that kind of had the same line of thought as I wanted to go. And that led me to a kind of pre-literature review. So it wasn't exactly how I'd started the literature review where you like go through everything that people have said and all the studies that you could possibly use to support your theory. It was just like me getting a gist of what kind of academic material or what kind of articles have been written on what I have written and how valid some of the points I want to make are going to be. And I would say that I was doing that while I was writing the research proposal. And once I found a few things that really stuck out to me, I was able to write the proposal. And then ever since then, I have been doing the literature review. And like, to me, that's like the same thing as looking for articles and things, because you start to find journals and those articles, they cite different studies. So that's still an ongoing process. Every time I start to think I have done with that, I find something new. But yes, I hope that answers your question.
So I work in a synthesis lab, which means we make materials. So things work a little bit different for us because we're studying things that have never been made before. So first, you kind of have to identify what physics you're interested in finding. Then you have to do research into what elements and what crystal structures and things makes that physics happen. Then you have to look into the chemistry parts of it to figure out how you can actually try to make that material. Then you actually have to try to make it. So it's a lot of reading, but I'd say it's been a consistent amount of reading since I started. Every time I want to study a new system, I have to do the same amount of work that I did at the beginning. I've gotten a little better at it over time.
Going into my research, I had a core understanding of basic geology going into it, but before I reached out to Dr. Williams, I did do some additional research, specifically into her past work. I looked up kind of past papers she had written, what projects she did at her old university before becoming a professor at UF. And so I went into my research application, or interview rather, with a bit of a core understanding of the kind of work that she does in the material, a lot more than I would have gone in just prior to the interview. So not as much as Jonathan or Serena for sure, but still a decent amount of information.
Cool. I think Ava is next.
Yeah, I was just wondering how related your research is to your major in school and like what you want to do after UF.
Good question. We can just keep the same order for convenience.
So my research definitely isn't related to my major. I know because I tried to make it my thesis and the Department of Political Science was like, no way. So my research is with the Department of History, with oral history program. And it's kind of interdisciplinary. So it's not super related to political science or international relations, which I'm studying. But to me, it's like very relevant because it's about like people, and it does have a connection to policy. So that's kind of how it relates to what I want to do. Like I'm like doing an internship right now with representative, and I have to write a policy proposal for him. And the first thing that's on my mind is, hey, what's something that I can do about the fact that there's all this health misinformation online, since I know a little bit more about it now. And so like I am interested in policy, and I'm interested in like society and people. So like I do see kind of relevance in it. And I know that if I manage to execute this research out well, that it'll benefit me in terms of like talking to employers about it or anything like that, because it demonstrates that I'm willing to look at things in all kinds of different lenses. And I think that that'll go the same for anyone who does research outside of their major.
Yeah, so my research is technically within my department, but it's very multidisciplinary, from engineering, physics, chemistry, nanoscience, all sorts of things. And so I think that gives me a really good basis to kind of solve a number of different problems. Basically, whatever I'm interested in, I can, start from the ground up with making the material and studying it and doing whatever I want, kind of thing. I'm currently in the process of applying to PhD programs, and I can hope to continue doing similar types of work.
My research also falls under the major, as the specific research is planetary geology and astrobiology is the kind of overarching concept I do. So I work closely with Dr. Williams, but also I work with other faculty members, just kind of getting baseline information on such. In terms of like what I want to do with this research and career path wise, I am also, like Jonathan, going to be going into PhD and master's programs, hopefully. Pipe dream is hopefully working with NASA, kind of in the same kind of faculty that my current professor does as well, working as a research associate, leading projects, that kind of stuff. So all of my research now essentially is building up that hands-on research experience required, and also just the more kind of specified planetary knowledge needed for those higher tier programs and eventually careers.
Awesome. Selma, is your hand up from before, or did you have another question?
It's from before, sorry.
Okay. And then Marianne, are you also hand up from before? Okay, last time a couple folks were having trouble getting the hand raising thing or figuring out how it works. So if you're trying to raise your hand and not able to, why don't you just go ahead and unmute and ask a question?
I can go. You guys all seem like very busy, have a bunch of different things that you're working on. I was wondering if you have any advice as to how to balance your research, your coursework, internships, and any other things like that.
Time management is a big thing. I can't say that I handle this the best way, but I think something that is really key is that you need to keep meeting with the people that are going to help you with your research, because that won't force you to be accountable. And the other thing is, when it comes to balancing with school, with internships, you need to make time for it, and you can't put it off, because even though it seems like you could maybe do it all in a week or whatever, it's absolutely not worth it to do that. And the best thing you can do is tackle it piece by piece. And so usually the hardest thing about research is starting it, because once you start it, you end up researching something different than you probably thought you were going to research, because that's just part of the research process. And I would say that that probably takes longer than actually sitting down and getting down and doing it and writing what you need to write and crunching the numbers you need to crunch. So definitely set time apart for it. Honor all of your meetings. Don't try to meet with all the people who are involved in your research, and try to make those meetings as like significant as possible. You have something to actually talk about. And also, if you're the type of person that works well under pressure, set up little deadlines for yourself. I registered for some workshops, not workshops, some like conferences, knowing that if I register for this conference, I have to present at this conference, so I have to have research done by then. But that's just something that I do because I sometimes I need pressure.
Yeah, I would just say time management is the biggest thing. I personally work a lot of like late nights in the lab just because that's when I'm productive and there's no one else around or anything. And so that just forces me to work because I'm not getting distracted, like talking to the postdoc or, having fun with the undergraduate friends and stuff. Um, but I mean, the biggest thing is, like she said, just kind of portion things out. Like if you know you have an exam coming up and you still want to keep doing research, instead of waiting for the last 3 days to study for the exam or whatever, just study a little bit for 2 weeks, and then you can continue doing everything that you want to be doing, basically.
Yeah, as I'm sure many people in this call can relate, very much heavily struggle with time management. It's one of the biggest hurdles I've had in my research. But the primary thing to do is to set constant deadlines. And if you have a hard time setting them yourself, then talk with your research professor to have you don't even have to have deadlines, just have like progress points that you need to reach. You need to kind of by X date, you need to be able to do Y things kind of material. Setting small objectives on the way to your larger overall goal is the best way you can possibly kind of combat the sheer amount of information you have to process, the sheer amount of work you have to do, both for research and otherwise. Like if you have a big semester due paper for your research, um, obviously you're not going to do that whole thing in like a week, or you shouldn't do the whole thing in a week. So set goals throughout the semester leading up to it. If you have to conduct the research, have the research data collected by halfway through the semester or a quarter of the way through. Have your rough draft by 2 months before it's due, like, or whatever kind of setting up of a timeline works for you and works with you and your research mentor is the best way to avoid crap, I have to make this poster presentation for this conference tomorrow and I haven't even started, which might have happened once to me.
Thanks for that advice, guys. Matthew has a hand up.
Yeah, I had a question more for Karina because I heard that she was doing some research outside of her major. Like, was it more difficult to get your research approved despite it being outside of your major? And like, how did you go about applying for research in that way?
Definitely. So I would say it was not more difficult at all, because the CLAS program doesn't really care whether it's in your major or not. So as long as you have a mentor and a proposal and it looks good, there's not really a reason why they tell you, oh, this isn't in your major, like you can't do this. If anything, I think they encourage that kind of thing. As far as the research process goes, I didn't have a hard time just because I was lucky that I knew Dr. Ortiz beforehand. So all the discussions I needed to have were with him, and I was able to speak with previous people in the oral history department who were a CLS scholar who submitted the proposal, and they showed me what their proposal looked like, and we talked about it. They talked to me about the program. So I think that just doing your homework really, really helps. And that there definitely won't be any types of barriers because you have a different major. And even just the process of finding research, maybe I don't know how it is in the STEM world, but I know that because social science is so interdisciplinary, you're not going to find a lot of faculty professors that are going to be like, no, I don't want to talk to you, don't help me, because they want help with their research. And if you can offer a different perspective, that's valuable.
Thank you.
Awesome. Kara, I think, is next.
Chance, you mentioned that you had to do like a poster board for a conference. This is more of a question for all of you, but how much public speaking do you feel that you generally do? Like, does that happen a lot where you're talking to more than just like your mentor or like your team to communicate like your findings and your research?
So because it's just like me and my mentor, I can't really say that I have all this like team communication. I will say though that I've had a lot of opportunities for public speaking, thanks in a large part to Dr. Watson. Just like, you know, for example, talking to you guys or talking to other CLS scholars. And then also like conferences are a public speaking opportunity. And I know that they have an option now. You can either like pre-record your presentation or you can present it live. So I think that in a lot of senses, you're not necessarily required to do a lot of public speaking with your research. They kind of let you do what you're comfortable with because your research is like very visual, you know? So that's at least been my experience.
Yeah, so it's kind of picked up as I've gone. When I was first starting to do research, I wasn't doing much because I didn't have any results or anything. But now I'd say I give a talk at least like once a month about my research. I do, you know, things like this where I'm just kind of speaking to other undergraduates, trying to get them interested in research and things like that. So it's definitely upped my public speaking abilities. Before this, I had no idea how to talk in front of people. Now I kind of do. So if that's something you're interested in, research is definitely a great place to get some experience with that.
Yeah, it definitely started out very slow in terms of public speaking because when you don't have a lot of data, you don't have a lot of stuff to talk about. But as it has progressed, especially this project, the project I'm doing with the CLAS Scholar specifically, it's a lot of presentation, both to my peers and also to proper scientists, which is extremely intimidating at first because you're going to a conference with people who have been doing this for far longer than you, and they are asking you actual proper critical questions. They are interested in what you are doing and they want to know more about it and they want to know what you know about your own stuff. So the public speaking aspect of it is definitely intimidating at first, but there's nothing more rewarding than talking to some like planetary science researchers who've been doing this for 40 years and having them actually genuinely ask you a question about your paper and you be able to respond in a way that they are interested and want to know more. It's one of the most gratifying feelings I've had in all my years of research.
That is awesome. And that's what we in the Beyond 120 would emphasize as a transferable skill. The public speaking stuff helps you not just in your academic career, but in every and all careers. Ava, I think, is next.
Yeah, I was just wondering what you guys were involved with before research at UF, and if there's anything that like helped you lead to research outside of this, like CLAS scholars.
So prior to research, like I guess the first thing I'll talk about is just the mentorship program, just because it like I think was really key. And I think that if you can put yourself out there and start making connections with faculty, whether it's research, whether it's just networking, it's really, really beneficial because sometimes they'll throw an opportunity at you that you didn't even know was there and they can offer some guidance. So I did that. The other thing I did was I started exploring a lot of like the different clubs on campus and getting to know like the faculty that were advisors for those clubs. And then I eventually stayed in the ones that I was interested in because there were some that I wasn't interested in. But that's at least what my research process was like. I did a lot of like online looking to see what kind of projects I want to join too. But the best, I think, research connections you can make are the ones that are really close to you. Like if you are getting an email from someone who's the head of your department or whatever, and they're the ones recommending it, like you would definitely want to try that first before finding something from a department or a professor that you have no connection to. So that's all I'll say on that.
Yeah, so before doing research, I was actually an engineering major, so I was interested in kind of the engineering clubs and things like that. And I found that those were really good at, you know, working with my hands and stuff. It made me do things that I'd never done before and things that I continue to do now, even in my research, because since it's kind of tangential. One club in particular, it was called GRIP. We did things for children that had like upper limb deficiencies and things. So for example, my group, we made video game controllers that could be used with only one hand and stuff like that. And so that was a good way to get skills that were useful in research while also doing something that I felt was a very good cause.
So I guess I'm a little bit of an oddball out in terms of the activities I did before research. Didn't really relate directly to it in many ways. I was very intimidated my first semester here at UF, so I reached out and joined some clubs. I joined the fencing team that we have at the department, along with the ukulele club, which were just kind of reach out programs, but in a way they did help a little bit with my research because I would never have reached out to even contact Dr. Williams to work with her in the first place if I didn't have a bit of confidence in myself that I built up from my involvement in extracurricular activities and kind of getting out there and presenting myself in different ways. So although my activities outside of, obviously my classes weren't directly related to my research, I still think that they, it's useful to kind of just see what the university has to offer, and you'd be surprised in what ways those activities and clubs can kind of help you out even in an indirect kind of avenue.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys, so much for joining us. We do have to spend 15 minutes or so on a reading discussion here at the end. So I think the Q&A portion will end on that note. But thank you so much, Jonathan and Karina, for joining us. And double thanks to Chance, who's been here for over an hour and 15 minutes now asking questions because he was in the first group as well. But thanks so much, guys. Your answers have been really awesome and helpful.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having us.
All righty, let me end recording.